Salams, you're watching NewsClick. We're coming to you from our studios in New Delhi, and today we're talking about two election results. One, of course, that has been the talk of the entire world since it's happened, the United States elections. But the more important one, or the more newsy one, which we're coming to first, is what's happening in Sri Lanka, where the leftist coalition has won a landslide victory. Giving us a breakdown of what's happening in both these countries, which have been in the news over the past, the US is always in the news, but Sri Lanka has been for many reasons over the past year or couple of years actually, is Prabir Purkayastha, Editor-in-Chief of NewsClick. Prabir, will get straight into it. Good to chat with you today. How are you perceiving the results, a kind of massive mandate by the people of Sri Lanka for this new government led by Dissanayake?
Well, I think the victory in the presidential election itself was quite clear. But the parliamentary election is even more of a convincing victory. He virtually has a complete control over now essentially the second part of the government. So both the president and the parliament are with him.
Right.
Of course, the Rajapakshas have been completely wiped out. Even the earlier government of Premadasa and the parties which ran that government, Premadasa's party has also been decimated. And the second party that's there is neither of the two, but an older formation which was there, which is now the distant second over there. No? So if we look at it, his victory is completely convincing, Disanayake's victory and his coalition, the NPP. The distant second in this case is really the Premadasa's party. And both Vikram Singhe, who was the president for some time after the Gotabayas were kicked out by the upsurge that took place, and of course Gotabaya's party have been completely decimated. So very, very clear victory, and also a clear mandate to do what he wants, because he's, in this case, his victory has been, as I said, even more convincing than the presidential victory.
Yeah.
So therefore, a strong government which can negotiate perhaps better with the lenders, in which case, of course, it will mean how much of the lenders can be pushed back in terms of delaying what the payments are going to be, how much of the support he can expect, for instance, from China and India, the two governments who seem to be interested in helping Sri Lanka, because I don't think the rest of the world really cares too much for Sri Lanka. So I think this is where it is. And it's interesting, though he's a Marxist, he's known to be left and all of that.
Yeah.
But even the Modi government made nice with him even before he had won.
Right.
So he had a meeting with Jaishankar in New Delhi before the elections. Clearly, there were signals that Dissanayake was going to win. The government of India has to come to terms with him. And also, whether it is him, Sri Lankan government, or it is China's government, neither of them really are going to play that the both are left and so on, because the real issue before Sri Lanka as well as the others is to how to stabilize Sri Lanka for the time being, and how to get their economy rolling again so that people have money, there is a certain amount of economic activities that picks up. And that really means before 2029, when all the repayments have to start, they should be able to then revive the economy. So I think that's the biggest challenge for the Sri Lankan people and also for the government.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to pull up a couple of those maps if I can. This is, of course, the broad sort of breakdown of the results that you were talking about earlier, and the sort of massive difference there that we can see.
You can see 61 point, roughly 6% against 17.7% of the number 2, which is the SJB, and that's Premadasa's party. Premadasa, of course, is a very old part of the Sri Lankan political system, establishment, as you said. Dissanayake is completely new. The Janata Vimukti Pariman is the core of the NPP, and that had 2 armed struggles, so it's completely out. It has been also decimated at various points of time. All of that is there. But nevertheless, they have really made a comeback because of the failure of the existing political parties, which are seen to be in different forms. cooperating with each other to have dynasties.
Right.
And I think that's the verdict that has come this time,
From the people.
as well as the last time.
Yeah, which brings us to a couple of interesting points, Prabir. You mentioned, of course, the lenders and the IMF being prime among them. We'll get to that in a minute, but this vote also unifying in a sense.
This is the presidential vote.
Right.
As you can see, though the red, which is Dissanayake, is still a significant part of the country, and he had a clear majority.
Right.
But if you go to the next one, which is the one which is this times, then you can see the spread is much more. And the interesting spread is compared to last time. Last time, the areas which are Tamil areas, which is the Jaffna area, which has a number of seats, that didn't go with Dissanayake,
right.
Okay, or his coalition. So also the Muslim areas, which are down south, also didn't go with him. But this time we can see the spread is significant. So this is where the there is a Muslim concentration over here.
Yeah.
But they haven't gone with apart from this one seat or maybe two seats, which is here. I think it's really one seat. Rest of it has also gone to NPP this time.
Yeah.
So this seems to show that he has been able to get the confidence for the first time among the Tamil minority and the Muslims, Muslim minority, which in this parts have a concentration. And that's quite remarkable because we had seen in the presidential election, he did not have these two areas with him. And this was perceived to be a weakness that he and his party had in Sri Lanka. But this time, everybody is given him a mandate. And I think that's a very important sign that in the last 5 months, 4 months, he's been able to bridge that gap.
Absolutely. And indicating some hopefulness, I think, from the people of Sri Lanka as well, like for some change in the ruling establishment that has brought them to this point. Which brings us to the IMF and Sri Lanka's economy's reliance on it. You mentioned India and China as major players, of course, in this conversation. How do you see that panning out? Because there was, of course, initial word from Dissanayake that some of those loan repayments would be deferred or held off on, and negotiations would continue. But then somewhat that stance has changed. How do you see it playing out?
You see, I think this will continue. What is the push and pull, so to say, or between the lenders and the borrowers.
Right.
Sri Lanka's case is particularly a problem because Sri Lanka had effectively become an economy which depended on export of very few commodities, tea, coffee, selectively, and then on the tourist income. Now, that kind of division of labor, as the economists would like to say, means that if you have a crisis, then the whole economy collapses. Contrary to what the people have been propagating, that it is Chinese loans and so on which have created the problem. More than 50% of the loans are really commercial loans. After that, it is the World Bank and the IMF which have given loans. Of course, China and as well as India are big lenders. China is a bigger lender than India is. But the point is, the largest part of the loan is to commercial banks. And I think the IMF, World Bank and the commercial lenders, particularly the commercial lenders, they have more than 50% of the borrowings that Sri Lanka has taken. And they are the ones who are going, particularly the commercial lenders, the banks, international banks and other ones, bondholders, they are going to want their pound of flesh.
Put the squeeze on.
And IMF really works on their behalf. They have given them a little of breathing space, thinking if they don't, that the baby will die with the bathwater. So therefore, you have to keep the baby alive, which is the Sri Lankan economy at the moment. And therefore, some oxygen, yes, but at the end of it, they are going to turn the screws on. And at that time, what role Sri Lanka will be able to play in terms of reviving the economy, when the restarting of their loans will start, and what is that China and India will do. Because they are the only ones, as I said, who would
really
be affected, who would be affected by the US taking over Sri Lanka, for example. China would not be happy with that. Neither would India be happy with that. And India would not want Chinese influence to be also increase in this
All-powerful.
area, because this is seen to be very close to India, therefore a part of our strategic interest, so to say.
Yeah. Maybe quickly we can touch on, if you think it's pertinent, the recent developments on India and China relations. Do you see that having any sort of possibility of leading to a cooperative kind of approach to Sri Lanka and its economic crisis, with BRICS playing a more proactive role maybe?
Well, it's an interesting proposition, but I think the India-China dynamics, or the China-India dynamics, whichever way you want to place it, is really well beyond Sri Lanka. And it's directly bearing on the other part of the equation, which is the United States.
Absolutely.
And it is really the feeling now, large parts of the world, that anybody who gets too close to United States is in for a problem, in for multiple problems. And therefore, the fact that India was trying to, Jaishankar, the foreign minister Jaishankar's argument that we have multi-alignments. We are not non-aligned, but we are multiply aligned. Now, those things are a bit of a problem, because if you are going to be in a Cold War with China, which is what we were after the kind of really pushing, shoving, which led to a number of people falling into that river and dying. So that kind of thing is now, hopefully the temperature has gone down. There's normalization of the borders at some level. Patrolling has started. We are back to before 2020. If you remember, that was the time that Mr. Modi and the Chinese leader were sitting on the Jhulas, at that point when this flared up. So I think if we can go back to the Jhula stage, we'd be happy. Okay, that at least one part of the tension is over. And both India and China have very strong trade and economic relations. Of course, given India's economic size and China's economic size, it's a fact that China has less stake in India's trade than we have in Chinese trade. But nevertheless, China would not like to lose or like to have US gain foothold over here. So the fact that multiple alignments Mr. Jaishankar talks about, or non-alignment as we talked about earlier, both would mean that relations between each other hopefully will return to a certain kind of not cold hostility, but to at least working relationship. And I think that will be important for the world. A lot depends on what Mr. Trump does.
Absolutely, which is the perfect segue into the next part of our conversation. So, of course, Prabir, a new presidency, the first time, of course, like people have reacted on all sides of, I think, the political spectrum to the immediate results coming in. And, of course, you've had a few days to also look at it from that macro perspective. What do you make of the results, and what led us to seeing Donald Trump back in the White House?
Well, just simply looking at the results without getting into detailed analysis, this is an election where Trump has won the popular vote, which is the first time after 20 years a Republican has won the popular vote. Now, it would indicate that he's gained a lot of votes, but that's not true. His gain in terms of votes, at the time that he lost to Biden, is about 1 million. Little about 1 million more or less. So it's not a significant gain that he has made. What is striking is the Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris, seems to have lost 9 million votes from what Biden got. Now, if you remember, Hillary Clinton had a 5 million lead over Trump. Biden had an even bigger lead. It was something like 11 million or so over Trump. So therefore, if you put all of this together, it's an election where the Democrats and its candidate Kamala Harris has lost rather than Trump won. Trump got, as I said, a marginal increase. That did not lead to this rout of the Democrats which have taken place, which you can see here. And some of this will not get into the details today. The 7 swings, or what is called the battleground states, all the 7 battleground states have gone to Trump. Biden had won a majority of them, if not more. And particularly what's called the Rust Belt, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, these have all gone to, these are the 3 states which are here. All of this has gone to Trump. Margins narrow. Margin between Trump and Harris in the states which would have given her the presidency, was less than $1 billion. So it's not that she had a huge gap, the two had a huge gap. The point is that it was an election for Democrats to lose, and they lost it. That's the real issue. So the question that emerges is, why did they lose it? And I think the answer to that would be that they miscalculated that if they had simply attacked Trump for being horrible and this and that, that was enough. They did not have to account for what they were doing vis-a-vis what is happening in Israel, the genocide in Israel. What about the loss of income for the poorer sections of the American working class?
Yeah.
The fact the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Of course, there is a lot of talk about the wokeism, anti-wokeism, etc.
Yeah.
But I think the hard bread and butter issues, which is what explains the swing in the poorer, at least the working class population, and amongst a large section of the population which may not be very large in that sense in numbers, but in this kind of elections makes a difference. It is the left-oriented voters and also the black community, the Muslims, as well as the Arab communities, and there are large numbers in the United States. In a close election, that matters. In Michigan, it matters. So those are the kind of things that I think they have to introspect. And particularly for those who have been left in the United States, they said, we are not going to consider ourselves captives of the Democratic Party.
Right.
And as long as they don't really have a left platform, and it came out so sharply, what Biden was doing on the issue of Palestine, on the issue of Gaza, and how Israel was being supported. I think $85 billion of arms have been given in the last 1 year to Israel. So a lot of the bombings and whatever arms are being used is really coming from the United States. So given all of that, I think this was a protest vote, which is why she has lost 9 million votes.
Since going down to also Biden's failures as president, as much as Harris's sort of lack of perhaps appeal as a candidate as well.
Not only lack of appeal, but the fact that she did not distance herself from Biden at all. So the fact that Biden was always known to be a Cold War warrior. He supported all of the things that have happened in terms of the United States, its policy, Iraq War, everyone. Cuba. So given all of that, the fact that she said, would you distance yourself from would you have done anything differently, which is a question asked of her. And said that she can't think of even one. So those things obviously damaged her. Okay, she didn't put the possibility that she might be different on the table. And the fact that you don't let somebody representing the Palestinian supporters of the Democratic Party even speak in the convention. Those were things which didn't go down well, but you let the person who is really, shall we say, a supporter of Israel speak. So I think those kind of things made a huge difference.
All right. A couple of things, of course, that this will have an impact on. The first maybe can be Russia-Ukraine. How do you see Trump kind of policy changing on that front, particularly in terms of military aid and other aid that's going into Ukraine? Can we hope for some attempts at some kind of peace talks in Europe progressing? And then, of course, more importantly, I think for us in some ways or connected, the impact on India, the global south. How will we deal with
what will happen in West Asia?
West Asia, of course.
The whole argument that Trump is essentially a warmongering madman is something that we have to take a second look at. Trump is, of course, very aggressive in terms of his quote-unquote US chauvinism. Makes no bones about it. But at the same time, is he more of a warmonger than Biden? Good question. Because Biden has endorsed whatever has been done in Ukraine. He's the one who thought they could collapse the Russian economy, which didn't work. And he's also the one which has given a complete blank check to Israel to do whatever it wants in Palestine. I'll not go into the details. He said, for example, 35 days, you have to let aid and other things go in. Okay? After 35 days, Did he take action? No, on the contrary. With all that is happening in Gaza, he said, they've done some things. They have let aid in. They are letting medical supplies go in, so it's okay. While we know what is happening on the ground was even worse. So given that, it's very difficult for Trump to do worse. Yeah. But of course, he can always try. So that's a different issue. I think the bugbear for him is Iran. And will he go into a war in West Asia again? Trump is not too much in favor of wars. He's in favor of bashing a few people up if he can get away with it. Okay, so that is his instinct of a bully.
Brinkmanship.
Instinct of a bully. Yeah. But a bully, if he's checked, then what happens is a question mark. Because after all, the US has enough ability to destroy the world 10 times over. Course, yeah. So has Russia. Yeah. So given that this is what does a bully do is a question. West Asia, yes, bullying is more possible. And he did do a lot of bullying last time he was here. He is the one who declared Jerusalem to be Israel's and all of that.
Yeah.
Shifted the embassy. But when it comes to Ukraine, Ukraine is near collapse. And the fact is that the West miscalculated under the leadership of the United States, miscalculated thinking they could collapse the Russian economy, and therefore they would get back into a position where they could control Russia and Russia's huge land mass, therefore its natural resources. So I think that is not only failed, but Ukraine militarily is near collapse. And therefore we can see the war is sort of moving towards a resolution if Russia wants to resolve it that way by taking back the Donetsk region, the already early other regions have more or less been taken over. They may not be very much interested, but yes, they want to take over the Donetsk province, as it would be called in India.
Donbass?
Donetsk. Yes, that region. So I think that if they take over, they might stop the war provided the other conditions are fulfilled. Don't join the NATO, and some of these conditions are fulfilled, then the war might stop. But can Ukraine afford to do it without the Europeans? In this case, basically the NATO powers in Europe, which Europe has now become a part of, Western Europe is a part of NATO. Will that make a difference? Will they be willing to come to a peace agreement? And what will Trump and the United States do? Are still open questions. It can boil down into a situation where the war freezes. Even now, South and North Korea, the war hasn't officially been stopped. There is only a temporary truce. Armistice is there for now last
70 plus years.
So can it go into a freeze, deep freeze? Those are questions which are not difficult to answer. I think the Ukraine war not hotting up further and Trump trying to get into an agreement where it's sort of frozen is more likely. I'm more worried about what Trump will do in Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria, Iraq, these issues, because there has always been this old philosophy that West Asia's oil is really America's. That was the Carter Doctrine for West Asia, that this is a strategic reserve of the United States. So will that still hold good? The third part of it is what happens with the trade war. And I think Trump would be very much in favor of trade wars, not so much hot wars. But predicting human beings is always very difficult. So I think that is something we'll have to see. But the kind of people he's putting into the key positions, both sides. There is also madmen like him, and there are also people who seem to be a little more balanced. So Trump as an isolationist, old-style isolationist, but willing to bully the rest of the world, looking after its own interests, not so much Europe and so on, saying that Europe is to pay its way. So all of that would seem to indicate a more US-centric policies and less global expansionist policies, if you take his rhetoric to be what his politics is. But, as I said, these are very, very uncertain questions. And of course, they're extremely important for the world because more than one country has nuclear weapons, whether it is China, whether it's Russia, and now Iran has potential to also become a nuclear power. We already have North Korea as a nuclear power. And of course, India and Pakistan were a nuclear power. So given that we are entering into an era where the nuclear button in multiple hands means the dangers to the world existing as we know it increases. And does Trump provide more of a threat? Some ways yes, some ways no. If he turns out to be an isolationist and only interested in trade wars, then trade wars is something that we can discuss another day. But will he take it to a further level of brinkmanship? That's an open question. As I said, I'm optimistic that in Europe he will not get into a shooting war beyond what already is going on in Ukraine. But in West Asia, I'm not sure, because US Navy is there, US Air Force is there, US bases are there. So that is a mix. And Iran has been his old target. So let's see what happens. And let's hope that some kind of sanity returns to at least the NATO countries, that they do not think that their future being tied up with Israel is something that's going to help either them. Of course, it will certainly not help the West Asians. But if you really look at it, if you listen to few sane voices out of Israel, most of those sane voices were forced to leave Israel, like Ilan Pape. They are saying that Israel is also getting overstretched, which they're not admitting. And this is a war that Israel cannot continue for too long. But for the Palestinians, they're paying a huge price for this.
All right, Prabir, I don't know how much of our eggs we should put in the European basket, but it's been good talking to you this afternoon. And we'll, of course, keep these conversations going on NewsClick. For those of you watching, thanks very much for joining us today. Do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.